पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर्द्यौ शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौ शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy, may all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayate Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. And the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We saw last week that the 13th chapter begins with a series of questions. Arjuna wants to know the difference between Kshetra and Kshetrajna, which we saw last week, the difference between literally the field, that is Kshetra, and the knower of the field, Kshetrajna. In effect, the field is all the material universe, and the knower of the field is the consciousness. So, the distinction between matter and consciousness, we saw that last week. The problem, according to Vedanta, is that although matter and consciousness, in Sanskrit it's called Jada and Chaitanya or Chit, they are as opposite or as different as light and darkness. And just as light and darkness cannot be at the same time in the same place, if there is light, then there is no darkness. If there is darkness, then there is no light. So the two cannot be together. In exactly the same way, matter or material things and consciousness can never be together, because they are just like light and darkness. But the world that we experience outside, and we as we experience ourselves, is somehow mysteriously a combination of matter and consciousness. There is this material part of our personality, the body, the mind, and then there is consciousness. So that is the primary dilemma, or the primary mystery. How come matter and consciousness, which are mutually so contradictory, so opposite, which can never ever come together, how have they managed to come together? And that's the kind of question, although not necessarily phrased in this way, different philosophies, different traditions have to come to grapple with. And they use different language, to different language of theology, of philosophy, to try to show how these elements, sometimes they are spoken of in terms of the divine element and the material element, or the non-divine element. I mean, the different words are used in different books. But how did these mutually opposite things come together? The answer that the Gita gives and the Upanishads give is that they have never come together. Now, that's not really satisfactory in many ways, because it contradicts our present experience. Our present experience is matter and consciousness are there, and we encounter both of them. the only way that this dilemma can be solved is by asking the question, how can impossible things become possible? If they are really impossible, then they can never be possible. The only way that which is impossible can be possible is only if it appears to be possible while continuing to be impossible. And the best explanation or the best example we can give is that of dream. That when I go to sleep, I'm lying motionless in my bed, fast asleep, and yet I find myself in the Bahamas, for instance. Now, it's virtually impossible. I'm sleeping in my bed. How could I be in the Bahamas at the same time? It's impossible. And yet, we know in a dream it's possible. So I'm lying in my bed at home, but in my dream, I go to Bahamas. And while I'm in the Bahamas in my dream, experiencing that, that's very real. So something that was impossible, and at the same time, my lying down in my bed is real too. So these mutually opposite or impossible things became possible only because I fell asleep. Without sleep, I couldn't have been in two places at the same time. And that is how the Gita and the Upanishads describe it. That the only way that consciousness and matter, which really can never come together, manage to come together somehow, this impossible feat was achieved when consciousness fell asleep and started dreaming, and in the dream, consciousness forgot that it was consciousness. So it went to the Bahamas of this samsara. That's the only way we can understand it. So that's what we saw briefly last time. The difference between consciousness and matter. One other question that this chapter begins with is, what is knowledge? Jnanam, what is knowledge? And Neyam, what is the object of knowledge? What is the goal of knowledge? Now that section is some we will take a look at briefly today. So what is knowledge? We see from verses beginning with 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 7 through 11 are verses where Krishna describes what knowledge is. In effect, what he is describing is what are the methods or what are the qualities that will produce knowledge in me. Because giving an objective definition of knowledge may not be so easy. We all instinctively know what knowledge is, but to define knowledge can be tricky. So what Krishna does instead is describe these are the qualities, if I develop, it will lead me to knowledge. Or these are the qualities that will produce knowledge. Or these are the qualities that will remove the obstacles on the path to knowledge. So we find a list of qualities or the list of practices that as devotees, as spiritual seekers, we need to practice in order for us to attain that knowledge. And we know knowledge of what? The knowledge that this material universe and consciousness are two separate things. And my body, my mind belong to the material universe. And as matter, they have to follow the laws of matter, which means they are perishable, they have a beginning, they have end, they continuously keep on changing. Consciousness is just the opposite. No beginning, no end, no change. It's constant, the only constant entity. In effect, that which is perishable, that which is not eternal, doesn't even exist. So that is something that we have to remind ourselves often. The definition of the real in Vedanta. Because this is a question also. How do you define reality? What is real and what is unreal? So one equation which is made, one assumption if you like, is made in Vedanta, and that is Satya or Sat means real equals Nitya means eternal. So that which is real is eternal. Now this equation is never really proved, but this is what the human mind instinctively understands when it says something is real. The only problem with our present mind is, while we understand what is real, the yardstick that we apply to reality, we do not apply it uniformly. We apply it only selectively. And that's a problem. Because if I start out with some parameter and definition that if this is the essential quality of reality, then I must apply that same yardstick across the board to everything. If we do that, a lot of our things will become clear, but a lot of the way we understand ourselves and the world will need to be revised. For instance, just take the example of dreams that we spoke about before. Now, most of us would say this world that we experience is real, but the dreams are not real. Because, well, if you ask someone, why is a dream not real? And why is this world real? And one immediate answer that comes to mind is that this world persists. It's there day after day after day, year after year after year, in the same world that I'm seeing from the time I'm born all through my life until I die. This is how it is. Yes, things are changing, but nevertheless, the world is still there. On the other hand, the dream world, I see different dreams every night. They keep on changing. The dream begins when I go to sleep, it ends when I wake up. So the reason why I do not accord the same reality to dreams is because they keep on changing, they are not constant, and they have a beginning and end. As opposed to this world, which has been there right from the moment I was born and will continue to be there. Yes, there is change here, but that change the change is superficial. While the world continues to be the same, there are changes in the world, but the world itself is not different the way the dreams are different. That's how most of us tend to think. And that's why we say dreams are not real, but this world is real. Now, if that's the way we define reality, and we start applying that criteria everywhere, without exception, then we might come across, or we might be forced to make some conclusions which go very much against the way we think. Because the body has a beginning, will have an end, and it's changing, not real. The mind, always changing, not real. So, lot of the things that it's like this. Whatever we are attached to, whatever we are identified with, even if it has beginning and end, even if it is changing, it's difficult for us to think about it as unreal. Even dreams for that matter. If there is some dream in which we see something which we like or which we identify with, or which we would love to be real, we somehow think, oh, I saw it in a dream, so it must be real. And that's the great temptation. Because if I see some, just kind of a replica of this world in my dream, I may not give much importance to it. But for a devotee, in my dream, if I see a divine figure, we think that dream is special. Because it's something that I like, something that I'm identified with, I'm seeing. And that's a whole big new discussion about whether there are different kinds of dreams and so on. But I'm just looking at it philosophically, that how we are not consistent in our understanding of real and unreal. And therefore, the next question would be jnana, knowledge. Knowledge would be to understand correctly what is real, what is unreal. To give me the ability to experience the real as it is, I need to cultivate certain qualities. Right now, there is a confusion in my mind. Right now, while I have a little bit of an intellectual understanding about how things are, it's still muddled up somehow. Oftentimes, my intellectual understanding may not be synchronized with my actual experience in daily life. Now, that kind of mismatch between my intellect and my actual experience, that mismatch can be removed if I can cultivate certain qualities. And so these verses now, 7 through 11, Krishna will give us the set of practices that we need to cultivate to remove the hurdles that are preventing me from actually experiencing the real. Understanding the real is a little bit easy, relatively speaking, but experiencing it needs some amount of practice. So let's look at that. Verse 7. Let me read verse 7 first. Amanitvam adambhitvam ahimsa kshantirarjavam acharyopasanam shaucham stairyam vinigraha. A set of things that a seeker of knowledge, a seeker of enlightenment needs to cultivate. Let's take them up one by one. Amanitvam. Amanitvam is humility. Swami Vivekananda says that, well, pride is always problematic. And the worst kind of pride, people can be proud of different things in their life, and every kind of pride has a problem. But the worst kind of pride, Swami Vivekananda said, is the pride of spirituality. To somehow think, I am more spiritual than you. Sometimes, as you said, holier than thou attitude. That's the worst kind. Yes, all other kind of prides have to be removed also. But especially for a devotee, the most dangerous kind of pride would be to think somehow, I am more spiritual. I am a better bhakta. I am a better devotee than all these other people. Once that kind of pride enters into our heart, spiritual progress comes to a complete halt. So humility, amanitvam, is absolutely important. Now, humility is not a kind of strategy, because it's possible to say the right things in public, or write things like, oh, I'm a nobody, or I don't know anything, because we sometimes hear many people saying things like that. But if I say something like that, while not really meaning it, it's like, yes, I know a lot of things, but I know that it's also bad to say aloud or bad to show off my knowledge, and then I say, oh, I don't know anything. Not that kind of humility. That it's not just about what we say. but what we feel deep inside. There is a saying that Vidya dadati vinayam. Vidya means knowledge. Dadati gives, vinayam humility. True knowledge naturally produces humility. Now, people can be scholarly. Now, scholarship and knowledge are not necessarily always one and the same thing. So sometimes scholarship can produce a lot of pride and vanity. And sometimes we do see these scholars fighting and trying to the game of one-upmanship, as they sometimes say. So we see that happening. But true knowledge will naturally produce humility. And what a devotee thinks is this way, that yes, I might know a few things, but there is so much more that I don't know. So when we try to remind ourselves of how much we don't know, it becomes a little bit easier to remain humble. It may also bring some amount of a relief in some ways, I think. I mean, when you go to a library and in the stacks where the books are kept, and if it's a big library, then probably there are hundreds and thousands of books and different volumes there. And if you go there and you see, well, how many of these books have I read? And so it can make us humble. There is so much knowledge, so much information out there, and so little have I read, so little do I know. So there is that humility. But there is also a little bit of relief in some ways, that I don't have to read all the books in a library. That my life can still be fulfilling without reading all this. So it's both. One can be humble, but also one then can know that given the limitations of time and energy that we have, I must be very careful about where I invest my time and my energy. And therefore, pursuit of knowledge doesn't mean just buying a bunch of books and reading them. It means being careful about what I read and what I do with that reading. Whether that reading makes me think, whether it makes me ultimately a better person, a better human being. Because that's the goal of all practices. It's not about how much we have read or how many degrees we have acquired and so on. It's like ultimately, as a person, have I become a better person as a result of all that? So humility. Adambhitvam, unpretentiousness. Now adambhitvam, unpretentiousness, is something that all devotees have to be especially careful about. All spiritual seekers have to be very careful about. Because there is no place for pretension in spiritual life. We are what we are. And authenticity really means that being our inside and outside must be one and the same. There's something inside and I'm pretending to be something else. That doesn't help. Yes, we have an ideal. We may be aware of how separated we are from that ideal. That yes, I know the right way of living, but yet I may also know that I am not measuring up to that right now. Now, it doesn't mean that I need to go and advertise all my weaknesses to everyone, but the struggle that I might have to be the kind of person I want to be, that struggle is genuine, that struggle is necessary, that struggle is a measure of my authenticity. But then to pretend to be someone other than who I am, believe it or not, and probably most of us know it from our own experience, that it really takes away so much of our energy trying to appear to be someone different than who I am. So if we are just honest with ourselves and lead transparent lives, it will save a lot of our energy, which we can use then to become better human beings. So, adambhitvam is very important to quality to be cultivated in spiritual life. Ahimsa, non-injury. Much has been said about it. We have discussed it often. How ahimsa or non-injury is often considered the highest among all virtues. And here it doesn't simply mean you don't go and injure someone physically. Non-injury at all levels. Not only going and hurting someone physically, but also through our words. So, harsh words which hurt other people's feelings, that would be violence. That would be you're injuring that person. Even more subtle, jealousy is a form of injury. Jealousy is a form of himsa. Even harboring hurtful thoughts about someone. So you see the practice of non-violence, the practice of non-injury is not to be limited only at the physical level. So it goes at the psychological level as well. And as we have seen, that one who is established in the virtue of non-violence or non-injury, such a person becomes a powerhouse. Such a person becomes a dynamo of power. Patanjali says in his Yoga Sutra that if a person becomes established in the virtue of non-violence, nobody else will be even able to hold thoughts of enmity in the presence of that person. The books say that even wild animals might come near that person and may not hurt that person. Although that is natural for wild animals to do, but they would not do if this person is completely established in non-violence. When you are walking in the garden or walking along the river or going for a hike, and along the way there are squirrels and birds, and as you walk by, they will not run away if we are established in the virtue of non-violence. The reason the birds fly away when we go near them is because the seed of violence, we may not be violent in a very gross sort of way, but the seeds of violence are still present in our heart. When those go away, animals will feel completely safe in our company. And we see there are instances where animals feel completely safe. Among the well-known examples, we know about St. Francis of Assisi, how birds would come and perch atop his shoulder over his head. So there are many examples in history. So, non-injury, an important quality to attain knowledge. Kshantihi. Kshantihi means forbearance. Forbearance, Holy Mother Shraddha Devi used to say, that is among the most important qualities that we need to cultivate as devotees. What it also does is that it prevents us from reacting. In some matters, or at certain times, a devotee would do well to be a little thick-skinned. By that I mean, if everything that is happening around me, if I become an extremely reactive person, that I have an opinion about everything that is happening around, if something that is happening and I don't like, I react to it strongly. I want to go and say about it or write about it or want to go and discuss these matters or call a meeting about it. If every little thing, yes, there are things we need to react. I'm not against reaction per se. But if I'm reacting to every little thing that is happening, and there are always things happening around us, then prayer, worship, meditation will be impossible. Because when you sit for meditation, and then just before meditation, you have seen this bunch of things happening or read about it or read about it on the internet or saw it on your television or saw what your neighbor is doing, and then you're reacting and then you want to sit and meditate. No, it's impossible. And so, there's a certain amount of forbearance is important. Now, that forbearance is first and foremost to be applied in one's own case. By that I mean that if I see someone hurting someone else, and then I say, well, I'm not going to react, I'm going to practice forbearance, that doesn't seem right. Because if there is something wrong being done, someone else is being hurt, and it is in my power to go and somehow stop that kind of injustice or that some wrong that is occurring, I must of course do it. That's my duty to do it. But first and foremost, that forbearance is when something is happening to me. If there is a lot of heat, for instance, now summer, it's getting very hot, and maybe your AC is not working, and then if I'm like upset about it from morning to evening, then finished. I'm not going to be able to meditate then. So forbearance really means, yes, there are going to be things happening around which may not always be convenient to me or may be somehow potential causes of disturbance to me, but can I forbear? Can I become like what Yama said about Nachiketa? Maharhadavat akshobhyamanaha. Can I become like this vast big lake which is not disturbed even when a few elephants go and start bathing in it? If it's a small pond and if an elephant enters into it, all the water is going to be disturbed. But if it's like a huge lake and a few hundred elephants go in one corner of the lake and are having fun, the rest of the lake is like, well, that's fine. The water is not disturbed there. So we should become huge like that internally. That all this commotion that is occurring in the world, which could potentially affect me, at least during certain times, the time of my prayer, time of my meditation, or time of my study, unless I'm able to create that kind of a wall and forbear it without reacting, there is no chance of getting jnana. So forbearance is very, very important. Next, kshanti was forbearance. Then arjavam, uprightness. Uprightness, arjava, is a quality of being transparent, or being, the best way probably to describe that is a non-crookedness. Now, most of us would say, well, we are not crooks. And probably we are not. But it's not just about being crooked in a very gross, tangible sort of way. But our minds could be very subtly crooked without our even realizing it. We might not see ourselves as crooks, but the mind, maybe due to our past habits acquired, not just in this life, maybe all of us have had a long past. So the mind does acquire certain strange ways of thinking and reacting. So those angularities of the mind, which have become a part of our psychological makeup, that thing has to be straightened out. So the practice of the different yogas, this Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Raja Yoga, in the beginning, the preliminaries of all of these yogas is not even directly related to the spiritual ideal. It's primarily related to one's own mind. First, the mind has to be straightened out. The mind that is twisted has to be untwisted. That is what the first thing that needs to be done. Only when the mind is made ready is that mind then, only then does it become capable of then helping me go toward my spiritual ideal. So, Arjavam really means non-crookedness, being upright, being straightforward, without, yes, just I think that's probably the best way to describe it. That one way to practice that is what Sri Ramakrishna said: harmonizing my thoughts, my words, and my actions. Because a lot of when the mind is kind of not upright, the twists in the mind occur when all these three are not in perfect harmony. What the mind thinks and what the words that we use to express our thoughts and what the actions that we ultimately end up doing, if those three are not in harmony, then there is a problem. So our effort to harmonize our thoughts, words, and actions is what will produce this quality, important quality of Arjavam. Next, Acharya Upasanam, service to the teacher. And this we have seen that those sources of guidance and authority in our life from whom we learn, our teachers, one way to express our gratitude for the knowledge that we receive is by serving the teacher. Now then the question would be, well, which is the best way to serve a teacher? And the best service to one's teacher is to follow the instructions of the teacher as best we can. Because nothing can please a teacher than seeing the student carrying out the guidance in practice to the best of their ability. Yes, there are other ways of serving, and we see throughout history, in mythology and even in among contemporaries, there are ways of serving. For most of us, our first teachers are our own parents. Then we have had teachers when we go to school and college. Then we have teachers in our spiritual lives. So there are a range of people in our lives from whom we have learned things. And the best way to express our gratitude to all of these teachers in our lives is to put into practice whatever we have learned from them. This is not to surrender one's own ability to think. And every teacher, all good teachers, will say, think for yourself. Accept. Sri Ramakrishna used to tell the devotees and people who came to visit him that accept only as much as it makes sense to you. He knew that the teachings that he was giving may not be for everyone, or may not be for everyone in their entirety. Depending on the person's mental makeup, depending on the person's interest, depending on the person's ability to grasp, they can only take in so much. And Sri Ramakrishna gave that freedom. He said that take as much as you can. He encouraged questioning. We know how much Narendra, the young Vivekananda, and how much the other disciples, the first generation of disciples who came to him, how much they questioned him. And he liked it. So yes, feel free to question your teachers. Get your doubts resolved. Accept only what makes sense to you. There is no such thing as a blind acceptance or blind faith. But once something makes sense to you, you have got all your questions and doubts resolved, then the student expresses their gratitude toward teacher by sincerely following all those instructions. That is what is meant by saying service. Acharya Upasanam. Acharya is one from whom we learn, the teachers in our lives. Shaucham. Shaucham is purity. And this we have seen again on several earlier occasions. There is external purity in terms of keeping the body clean, wearing clean clothes, living in a clean environment, but also internal purity, keeping the mind free from all junk, putting only good ideas in the mind, letting the mind do positive, constructive things, thinking good thoughts. That would be inner purity. So Shaucham, Stairyam, steadiness. This is also a very important quality to acquire knowledge. Steadiness. We know that a great challenge really in life is to keep at certain practice steadily, day after day after day after day. That is something most of us struggle with. Yes, there are times when we are very enthusiastic. We just feel, yes, I must got to do this. And not just about spiritual life. It's even about, sometimes we become aware of the fact that, I need to do more exercise. And then we say, okay, I'm now going to join a gym, or I'm going to do this. And then maybe for a few days, we do it. But then, after a few days, a slackness arrives. And things go on, then go down, slowly. And then there is a period of, we just kind of lose interest in something. And then suddenly, maybe, after a few days, we again say, oh no, it's too bad. So again, the graph goes up. And so this happens in pretty much most things in life. So steadiness is, can we hold on to some practice and not allow it to go down? And therefore, a way to test that is to make a routine, for instance. I remember I used to do that a lot when I was a little child in school. I just felt great, just making, okay, this is the time I'm going to study, this is when I'm going to exercise, and so on. And just the effort to make that plan, you just felt it good, that I have made some good resolve, a good determination. But considering the number of times I have made those plans, it was clear that I didn't always succeed in kind of keeping it up day after day after day. And that may be the experience of many of us. So this is one quality we all need to cultivate. And one aspect of it is clearly those of us who have received guidance from our spiritual teachers about our daily practice of japa, prayer, meditation. Now that is something that we are expected to do day after day after day after day after day. It's not like a 6-week course or an 8-week course. I mean, that's tough. It can be tough when you are told, do this japa, do this meditation. Said, well, how long? How long should I do it? Well, just keep on doing it until you become enlightened. When will I become enlightened? I don't know. It just depends on how earnestly do you do it. And it also depends on God's grace. And it also depends on your effort. So it could be a few days, a few weeks, a few months, a few years, a few lifetimes. Now that's not that kind of an ambiguity. People sometimes don't have, they just feel like, no, I mean, it doesn't have an end date. No, its only end date is your enlightenment. And you don't know when you're going to be enlightened. All that you know is that if you put your best effort, then through God's grace, that enlightenment can happen. It can happen anytime. It can happen tomorrow. It can happen after an hour. But in order for me to do that, I need to say, I'm going to keep on doing this practice. Even if I don't see any immediate results, even if I find that I'm doing it for days and weeks and I'm not having some dramatic experiences. So, without getting discouraged, can I just keep on doing it steadily? What will help me in that whole process? The deep faith, Shraddha, that the path that I am on is the right path. The practice that I am doing is a practice that works. Now, if I'm doing some practice like if no one has done that practice before, then it's like, well, I'm not sure whether it works. But luckily for us, what we have learned from our gurus is a method and a practice that has been in play for generations before us. We know that generations of people before us, for centuries, have followed the same method and have become enlightened. So the methods are time tested. We know they work. So at least there is no chance for doubt whether it would work or not. It's like a new vaccine comes and it has not been tested before and you are in the trial group. Well, you could have some faith, but there will be a little bit of fear also that, well, will it work or not? But if you find, in fact, this is exactly what happened. Just a few days ago, I was on a Zoom call with someone, and it turned out that they were reluctant to take vaccines. And the idea was that, we know there is a section of people, in some parts of the world, pretty significant section of people who are still ambivalent about the corona vaccine, the vaccine for that's been now become a big thing, and so those people were saying that, well, we don't know whether enough trial has been done, and we don't feel safe doing it. And I told them, I said, this kind of thinking probably had some solid ground when the vaccine were in a trial stage, or when the vaccine had just been come into the market and people had just started getting it. But I said, at this point, millions have received it already. Well, there are a lot of people who have not yet, who want to get it but haven't yet got it. So that's a problem in itself. But yes, a lot of people have already received the vaccine. It has been proved that the vaccine does produce protection. So why this hesitation? I told them, look, I said, I have had vaccine, I am still breathing, and I just feel good about it. I feel protected. And when I said that, then they are not about to go and start taking a vaccine immediately. But at least their tone changed a little bit, and they said, Well, yeah, that makes sense, but there is still, we are not very sure. But maybe eventually we might end up getting a vaccine. Now, why am I saying all this? Because the same thing can happen with our spiritual practice as well. If it's some novel spiritual practice which no one has done before, well, there is some reason we could say, well, I'm not sure whether it will work. But if we are doing something which has been practiced by generations of people before us, we have testimonies that people who have done that practice have become enlightened, then we have no reason to say, well, I'm not sure. So then we know that this is something that works, and what is in my hand is to give it the best shot. And what I can do is this quality of practicing it steadily, with steadiness. Sthiryam. Finally, Atma Vinigraha, self-control. Here by self is meant not the Atman, it meant the mind. It's the mind that is the root cause of problem. And a mind that is well controlled becomes a great friend. A mind that is out of control becomes an enemy. It's like your pet. A pet which is well trained becomes so much joy. There's a lot of fun you can have. And a pet which is well trained can be a source of great stability, even emotional stability to a person who has that pet. But if the pet is not trained, then that pet can really give you a headache. It'll increase your work, a lot of frustration, and no fun. A mind is like a pet. So if we train the mind well, that mind can lead to knowledge. An untrained mind cannot take us to the spiritual ideal. Susamskrutena manasa, Shankaracharya says in his commentary, a mind that is refined, a mind that is acquired clarity. And a mind that is refined and who has acquired clarity is the mind that has come under control, the mind that is trained. With that mind, knowledge is possible. So, just to quickly take a look at these few of the practices that were mentioned in verse 7. Amanitvam adambhitvam ahimsa kshantirarjavam acharyo pasanam shaucham sthairyamatma vinigraha. This is verse 7. Humility, unpretentiousness, non-injury, forbearance, uprightness, service to the teacher, purity, steadiness, self-control. In the next 3 verses, we'll have more practices that Krishna will describe, all of which will be helpful in acquiring knowledge. Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. So we'll take a 5-minute break, and if you have any comments, thoughts, questions, please share them, and we'll meet again in 5 minutes. Let's look at the questions. Can you explain how I might better reconcile the idea of non-duality with the idea that our ever-changing live dream is not real at all? I do not know what is meant by saying reconciling, because the two are actually already reconciled. It's because the life and the world that we experience is not real. That is why non-duality exists. Otherwise, there would have been a duality, that the real me, the divine principle, and the world, then there would have been a duality. But because the world, real as it may appear to us, is not really real, that is why non-duality is the only existence, or the existence is non-dual, if you like. Next, each word in this shloka, in this beautiful chapter, raises questions from us. How is it that Arjuna doesn't ask any questions for clarity after these verses? Well, that's Arjuna does ask whatever questions came to his mind, and maybe after reading this, immediately no question came to his mind. Well, I don't know. I really don't know. What I do feel is, whatever questions came to Arjuna's mind, he asked them. Now, whatever questions come to our mind, we are free to ask them also. It's not necessary that the questions that come to our mind should be the same questions that should come to Arjuna's mind, and vice versa. All of us are different people. Some of our questions may be common, but a lot of our questions will depend on our way of understanding, our way of relating to the teaching. And so it's fine. If Arjuna doesn't ask them, we will ask them. Next, I have heard that the Gita can be divided into 3 sections of 6 chapters each. Is this 13th chapter the start of the section on Jnana Yoga? Yes, certain commentators have made those kind of divisions. The first 6, the next 6, and the last 6. And if that kind of dividing the whole teaching into particular sections makes sense to us, and that's fine. But it's not something that is universally believed or accepted. So one is free to dissect the Gita in whichever way they find it convenient. Shankaracharya in his commentary doesn't make those divisions. He just takes each verse, each chapter on its own merit. So that's one way to do it also. The other way would be to find a larger pattern and try to do it. The idea, Sri Ramakrishna used to say that there is it's called this sweet roti, one kind of roti, which is very, very sweet. And he said, the idea is, if you take like a pizza, for instance, that no matter from which way you eat it this way or this way, or you make it into sections, ultimately, you enjoyed the way you feel best way to eat it. Ultimately, it's the same pizza that you are eating, although you could eat it in many different ways. So the Gita is like that. We could study it in many different ways, which we are already doing actually, because this is the 3rd or 4th time that we are studying the Gita. There was way back many years ago, we studied it with each chapter, each talk with each chapter, the summary, what is the essence of that chapter. Then we studied it verse by verse, taking each verse and going with. And the study that we are doing now is more about taking a theme in a particular chapter and dwelling on it. So even the Gita, we are doing it in different ways. There is no one standard way to study it. So one should feel free to find one's own innovative ways of studying and understanding the Gita. Next, how can we be non-injurious to ourselves when there is guilt by deviating sometimes from the supreme truth? Well, as long as we have not become enlightened, deviations are already going to occur. And one way to prevent these deviations is to practice steadiness that we spoke about before. A non-injury in this case would be to not beat oneself so much as to be completely demoralized. Yes, our failures should, even if they make us sad a little bit, we should have the willpower to get up after every failure and start marching, and not be weighed down by guilt and so on. It's not easy sometimes, but that's the way to go forward if we want to make progress in life. Next, ahimsa is not hurting anyone through thought, word, and behavior. But if someone behaves or speaks to us hurtfully, how should we look at it while not reacting to it? The practice is forbearance. We have limited control over other people's behavior. So first thing to do is to protect ourselves. By protection, I mean that if someone speaks with hurtful speech, that I, rather than reacting to it, should reflect over what is said. Now, not all hurtful speech is necessarily bad, in the sense that if someone says something to me which might hurt me, but which might be truth, then I could at least reflect within and say, well, what this person is saying is true. Yes, it's like, let me see, give you an example. For instance now, if I tend to be lazy, and then someone says, you lazy fellow, now that's going to hurt me. But if I reflect on what that hurtful speech was, I say, well, what that person is saying is true. I am lazy. In that case, I don't have to go and, well, if you want, you can go and thank that person for waking you up, but you don't have to. But inside, you know that, well, this person has reminded me of something which I was ignoring. And if that can help me stop being lazy, to become active in my life again, then however hurtful that speech was, however hurt I was, it really did me some good. But it's also possible that sometimes people might say something which is not true at all. If it is not true, then there is no reason why I should be hurt. The only reason I could be hurt still would be, I'm not like that. Why is this person, suppose I'm not lazy, and someone says, you lazy fellow. I might still get hurt thinking that I'm not really lazy. Why is this person calling me lazy? But if I look within and say, well, I'm not really lazy. So this person calling me lazy doesn't make me lazy just because this person says so. So it becomes easier than to ignore it. So either way, whatever hurtful speech is directed towards us, we can reflect on it in our heart, find if there is any truth in it. If there is any truth in it, and if there is a way for me to improve myself, of course I should do it. If there is no truth in it, just ignore it. That seems to be the best way to do. Now, ignoring hurtful speech, I need to kind of qualify that a little bit. Sometimes one's forbearance can be mistaken. One's forbearance could be thought of as a form of weakness. So it's good to make sure that you are forbearing everything from a position of strength. That you are not reacting, not because you are not able to react, but you have the ability to react and yet you don't do so. Because only from a position of strength, it's possible to forbear and not feel hurt. From a position of weakness, hurt becomes more common. Hurt because it's kind of a double hurt. You get hurt by someone who says something hurtful, and then you are even more hurt because you're not able to retaliate. And so we have to be strong. We have to make sure that people don't treat us like a doormat. So strength, but also forbearance. Now, there could be messy situations in life, and so we'll have to just take each case on its own merit. But these are the broad principles that we need to follow. Next, how to maintain our Shraddha for a long time. Shraddha has to be maintained, but there is no mechanical way to maintain it. It's just continuous practice of doing what is right, holding on to dharma, being steady in our practice, and prayer. If one is able to pray with faith and intensity, then it's easier to hold on to one Shraddha. But if we are lax in our practice, if we just do some prayer now and then maybe after a month or 2 months, then there will be periods when we'll find that our faith has kind of gotten diluted and we might feel weak. And that's the time we suffer more. So maintaining one Shraddha and in fact strengthening it day after day after day, that will come through steadiness and purity of life. Next, if all knowledge is within us, how does the limited material mind gain realization of the unlimited consciousness and ultimate enlightenment? How do we reconcile knowledge, belief with actual experience? As I said in the beginning, the knowledge is within us and yet we don't have access to that knowledge. Now there is a contradiction there. And that contradiction is, if all knowledge is within me, in fact I am knowledge, that is what Chit means, I am that consciousness, but not know that, not live with that awareness, is because something has gone wrong. And that something which has gone wrong, if it has actually gone wrong, then there is little that anyone can do about it. Because if it can go wrong once, it can go wrong again. But the Vedanta position is nothing has really gone wrong. That pure consciousness, I am still that. But I do not have access to it because I have forgotten it. I have fallen asleep and therefore I need to wake up. And that waking up occurs through the cultivation of these virtues and through the spiritual practices that we have received from our teachers. Next, what makes meditation different from a dream? Very much different. Meditation is a conscious, self-directed movement of the mind. Dream, it is a movement of the mind, but you have no control over it. We cannot control our dreams. We have no control over what we will see and where the mind will go. But meditation is actually a conscious effort when we are holding the mind in a certain direction, focusing the mind at a certain ideal. So it's a complete opposite really of what happens in a dream. Dream, we are passive viewers in a dream. In meditation, we are active participants in the practice of meditation. Now, when we are in samadhi, when the mind is already focused, then there is no active involved because that I has completely vanished. Then we are just there. We are just in the experience. But the practice of meditation itself is a very conscious, self-directed activity as opposed to the dream. Next, Is cultivating forbearance an uphill task with the increasing compassion and empathy resulting from spiritual practice? Even Swamiji wept at the suffering of the downtrodden. Yes, that showed Swamiji's compassion, yes. So forbearance doesn't mean that lack of compassion. As I said, forbearance is primarily directed toward oneself. It's not that you see other people suffering and you say, I'm practicing forbearance, therefore I'm not going to react. That's not the point. The point is, if I'm the one who is suffering, either due to excessive heat in summer, or there is a snowstorm and whatever, or other people troubling me, then I should have the ability to forbear that. It's not forbearing someone else's suffering. I think that's an important distinction. So thank you for all the questions, and we will continue this discussion when we meet next week. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.